Hello, everyone. In this short presentation, I would like to share with you some information about the trait approach to leadership. The majority of the information in this video, it's based on Peter Northouse's book, Leadership Theory and Practice. I'll provide you with a description of the trait approach. We're going to look at the studies of leadership traits. We're going to look at the major leadership traits. Then we're going to look at the relationship between five-factor personality model and leadership, and the relationship between emotional intelligence and leadership, and some of the lessons learned. Trait approach is the most studied approach to leadership. It has more than 100 years of studies behind it. Peter Northouse identifies or defines trait as a set of distinctive characteristics, qualities, and attributes that describe an individual. It's basically those characteristics or aspects of self that makes us unique. This was, again, the first approach to study leaders, and quite often you hear that the trait approach from the perspective of great men theory. The reason behind that is that when scholars attempted to first study traits, they were examining the qualities of political and military leaders of that time. And this approach to leadership focuses on individual characteristics that distinguishes leaders from non-leaders. They focus on the innate characteristics. Quite often we focus from a personality perspective, those innate characteristics that are stable over time and across situations. And quite often when you hear the debate between are leaders born or made, we are focusing on the born aspect of that debate. And there have been multiple studies and meta-analysis on leadership traits. And here we're going to examine the 6th group of studies and see what conclusion we can derive from them. So the first systematic analysis of different studies on leadership traits was conducted by Stockdale in 1948, and he analyzed 124 trait studies that were conducted between 1904 and 1947, and he explored how individuals in various groups became leaders and identified, you see in the first column here, identify 8 traits that were associated with leadership. And I identified that intelligence, alertness, insight, responsibility, initiative, persistence, self-confidence, sociability were important leadership, but they were important only in relations to different situations. In other words, the conclusions were that leadership traits are important, but they have to be associated with different situations. In 1974, he conducted another study where he analyzed 163 studies on leadership traits between 1948 and 1970. And he identified more traits. Some of them were similar to the first one. You see here in the 3rd column, like achievement, persistence, insight, initiative, self-confidence, responsibility, cooperativeness, tolerance, influence, sociability. And he came to a more balanced conclusion here about the situations and traits. So traits were identified that were important to leadership. Another study was conducted by Mann in 1959, where he examined 1,400 findings on traits in leadership in small groups, and didn't really take into consideration situational factors. He identified the following 6 traits as important for leadership: intelligence, masculinity, adjustment, dominance, extroversion, and conservatism. And 1986, Lord and colleagues took these studies that were used by Mann and used a more sophisticated meta-analysis procedure and identified 3 traits that were important to leadership, and they were important across situations. You see in the 4th column here, intelligence, masculinity, and dominance. In 1991, Kirkpatrick and Locke also conducted a study on traits, and they came to conclusion that leaders are different from non-leaders. Those 6 traits: drive, motivation, integrity, confidence, cognitive ability, and task knowledge. And they stated that leaders could be born with them or they could develop over time. The last group on the last column, the last group of studies conducted by Zakharov, Kemp, and Bader, 2017. They focus mostly on different studies that are related to the emotional intelligence, and we're going to look at them a little bit later in this presentation. So you can see right here, I have some highlighted traits, because you see across different studies here, you see some common ones, but we don't have a really definite conclusion. For example, intelligence was found to be important in 3 of these studies, persistence also in 3, self-confidence in 3. But although we have many studies, we don't really have a concrete conclusion here that which set of traits are important to leadership. Even though we cannot come to a clear conclusion, Northouse provided a summary or a convergence on 5 traits that are important to leadership. The first one is intelligence. Intelligence identified by the ability to learn information applied to tasks. This is very important because leaders work with different types of information. So it's important to have the ability to acquire information, to process it, and then to share it with different constituents. So it's important that individuals in leadership positions have high intelligence. Also, scholars are cautioning in terms of the level of intelligence, where the difference between intelligence level of the leaders and the average for the group. So most studies have concluded that it's important that the difference should not be very big. So about 1 standard deviation between the intelligence, the IQ level of the leader and the average of the group. The second one is self-confidence, is the ability to be certain about one's competencies and skills. Quite often we focus from self-esteem and self-efficacy perspective. Self-esteem is mostly how an individual feels about themselves, and self-efficacy, it's the belief that a person can accomplish a certain task. So it's important that leaders have a high degree of self-confidence, because that self-confidence will translate to the other constituents that they work with. Determination, it's an important aspect of leadership as well. Here we're focusing on desire to achieve certain goals. So for example, initiative, persistence, dominance, drive are important qualities of a leader, and especially as we are dealing with this dynamic environment where leaders have to deal with overcoming different obstacles. And integrity or character right here, integrity is the quality of trustworthiness and honesty. So we focus on defining it from an individual having a certain set of beliefs and values that are consistent, and they are translated in one's behavior. So followers or constituents want to see that consistency, that degree of integrity in one's behavior. So quite often we focus here from a leader's character. And then the last one is sociability, the predisposition of an individual to develop positive relationship with others. So they are friendly, outgoing, courteous, tactful, and diplomatic. So that's the convergence that Peter Northouse came to in terms of the major leadership traits. Also, Judge and colleagues have examined the relationship between the 5-factor personality model in leadership, and they found that there is a positive relationship between different factors within the 5-factor model and leadership. For example, they identified that individuals who score high in extroversion, those individuals who are sociable, assertive, and have positive energy, they tend to be associated with positive leadership. Also, those individuals who are open to new experiences, openness right there, those who are have a tendency to be informed, creating, insightful, curious. The results show that there is a moderate to strong association with leadership. Those who score high in conscientiousness, those individuals who tend to be thorough, organized, dependable, and then there is a positive association or moderate to strong association with leadership. And then those who score low on neuroticism or high in emotional stability also have a moderate to strong association with leadership. The only factor from the 5-factor model that has a weak association with leadership is agreeableness. So an example here, what do we do with this instrument? So for those of you who are in HR field, you might want to identify who will be good good candidates to be promoted to a managerial position or to be selected for a leadership training program. You might give them the 5-factor personality assessment. And based on the results, if you see that they score high on extroversion, openness, conscientiousness, and low on neuroticism, then they might be a good candidate to be considered for leadership development. The other area that belongs within the trait approach to leadership is the emotional intelligence. So there have been multiple studies that have examined emotional intelligence in leadership. And think about emotional intelligence, we focus on one's ability to understand their emotions and then apply those emotions to daily life. So leadership is that we talk about a relationship between leaders and followers. Therefore, it's important that leaders be aware of different aspects of emotional intelligence. So understanding themselves and then their relationship with others. So there have been multiple studies, as I mentioned earlier, in this area. I'm going to mention a few of them. So Goleman, 1996, identified a strong association between EQ and leadership. And his article that was published in Harvard Business Review, What Makes a Leader, he identified 5 components of EQ: self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, social skill, and motivation. And basically those individuals, or in this situation, leaders who score high on those 5 components then tend to be effective leaders. Schenkman and Allen published the Emotionally Intelligent Leadership book. They identified 3 elements of an emotionally intelligent leader, that the leaders are aware of context, self, and others, and they identify 21 characteristics that are related to these 3 elements. Goleman and Boyatzis identified another model with 4 components on self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So the first 2 focus on self, and the last 2 focus on others. Although there is no agreement on the degree of the impact of emotional intelligence on leadership, I think most people in the field would agree that EQ appears to play a role in leadership process. And most people claim that the emotional intelligence could be improved and developed through training. So what are some of the lessons learned from here? Well, leadership trait approach, it's a leader-centric approach. So we place the leader at the center of leadership process. Leaders with certain traits then tend to become better managers. So the role of HR managers is to identify individuals with specific traits and then offer them the opportunity for training and development. So using different assessments could help. Although there is no clear agreement, as we looked earlier in multiple studies, there is some convergence, and I'm going to mention a few of them right here. If you were to develop some or focus on those traits. So the first one, it's integrity. It's important that you develop aspects of integrity or a leadership character. So my encouragement to you is to develop a clear set of values and beliefs and develop consistency in your behavior that those beliefs and values are exhibited in every single day in your behavior, because that's one way you could build trust with different constituents. So if we know that trust is the foundation of every single relationship, and leadership is a relationship between those who are willing to lead and those who are willing to follow, then having high degree of trust is very important. So develop a high degree of integrity. Focus on your drive, perseverance, and determination. Work on becoming disciplined and focus on perseverance and goal achievement. So you probably heard this. It's not, it doesn't really matter how many times you fall. What matters is what happens after you fall. Do you get up? Do you persevere? So work on developing perseverance and determination. Work on developing personal relationship with others. Sociability has been identified as an important trait of leadership. So I encourage you to push yourself and develop a relationship with other people inside of your organization and the community, faith-based institution, volunteering organizations, or in other social settings. Push yourself if you don't feel comfortable engaging in developing relationship. And then pay attention to EQ. EQ, it's one of my favorite areas, and I encourage you to start working on your self-awareness. So how do you do that? Take different assessments. We talked in this presentation about Big Five, personality assessment. Complete that one, see where you score, and take other assessments, and then reflect on them. Ask for feedback from other people. Ask for feedback from people who are going to tell you the truth, not what you want to hear. And then put yourself in uncomfortable situations. See how you react, what you learn from them. And then move to self-regulation. Reflect on those experiences. Reflect on your assessment. Reflect on feedback. Reflect on learning from uncomfortable situation. And then engage in self-regulation. Apply it to your personal development. So in the end, I want you to remember that from a trade perspective, leadership starts with you. So we place the leader at the center of leadership process. But since we add the process, then leadership is not about you. So leadership starts with you, but leadership, it's not about you. That's it for now. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to write them below this video. And I'm going to post additional videos on the other leadership approaches. Thank you.